Aloha Kākou and Ikomo Mai, everyone. Malu Dudoit as well, our guest speaker, and our audience to the TCBES Spring 2022 seminar series. Our presenter today is originally from Wai'ehu on the island of Maui and Honouli'ai on the island of Molokai, but he now resides on the big island of Hawaii. After graduating from Kamehameha schools in 2011, he enrolled at Hawaii Community College, where he received his AA in Hawaii Lifestyles in the Hula track, and the University of Hawaii at Hilo, where he received his BA in Hawaiian Studies in the Continuing Culture track. That was in 2016. In 2019, through the Unukupukupu Hula School, instructed by Taupori Tangaro, he was reserved the recognition as Kumahula. Currently under the directorship of Gail Makuakane London at the Kipuka Native Hawaiian Student Center at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. He is a cultural engagement specialist tasked to support the academic development and success of Native Hawaiians. This being done by promoting learning environments that are culturally responsive and appropriate. Just a quick little plug, the Native Hawaiian Student Center also has tutoring, mentoring, and community service opportunities, not only for Native Hawaiian students, but for all UH Hilo students. Malu is passionate about Hawaiian culture and contribution to a better understanding of protocols and cultural practice as a first step to develop a deeper relationship with the environment. So without further ado, Malu Dudoit.
Lo na hilo ka aina ka wawu kulu kulu ai. O hilo aina ho lulu le hua na le hua makano yo hous. A mai ka wakili hune o kana hele. Ia meke ala o ka maile o pana e vai tu no na vai mo o wai luku e lua luku e naka naka I kai palawa e uana I haili ka leo muki o na manu o lono wana o vai o lama me ka vai lepo I ho o kahi me vai loa a pai ke kula o hana kahi a kahi kamana o a ke aloha I noho loa I moku ola I ola na kini Ano ai ke aloha ka aina ya Kākou pakahi apau. Aloha no ya Kākou. My name is Malu Dudoit, and I'll be your presenter in today's seminar series. First and foremost, I would like to mahalo Matt for the introduction and working with me early on, trying to settle out our details and getting things ready for today's presentation, as well as Lisa and the rest of the TCBES department for allowing me time and space to share my perspectives and point of views of land acknowledgement protocols and environmental kinship. Today, my presentation is titled, I know it might have been titled O Ka Aina Ke Kumu is what was released, but I decided to change my title for today's presentation to Ola Kākou. After reading through some of your thoughts and question submissions, it really got me excited about today's topic and the kind of angle that I could take today's presentation with. So without further ado, Ola Kākou simply means when you live and thrive, we all live and thrive. And so it is my hopes that after today's presentation, you'll get to walk away with at least one new thing you learned from today, to be able to apply into your own personal field of study and research and work. Don't mind me, I will be shifting back and forth. I am working on two separate screens here, just because I did have a laptop glitch, and just to make sure that I'm following my presentation as intended to. So to quickly introduce myself again, my name is Malu Dudoit, originally from Paia and Wailuku, or Wai'ehu of Maui, as well as Honouli'ai of the island of Molokai. I moved to Hilo back in 2011 to start my undergraduate degree, as well as my associate's degree at UH Hilo and Hawaii Community College. In 2016, I received my bachelor's in Hawaiian Studies, continuing the culture, as well as my associate's degree in arts through the Hawaii Lifestyles Hula track at Hawaii Community College. Immediately after graduating, I started my professional work as the community engagement facilitator for Hawaii Papua Keao initiative to indigenize UH system campuses. Since then, I've been working in my capacity also as a lecturer at the Kahakaula Ke'elikolani Department of Hawaiian Language. And in 2019 was promoted to cultural engagement specialist under Hawaii Papua Keao. For today's presentation, everything I have gathered and accumulated comes from my worldview and perspectives from my traditional trainings as an olapa or hula dancer and as po'opua'a or next to kin as to running a halau through the Uno Lehua cohort of the Unu Kupu Kupu Halau Hula or traditional hula school. It is also in 2019 I have received the prestigious honor of graduating from our halau hula, from our traditional school of hula, under the rights of Uniki Kumu Hula by Taupori Tangaro through Unu Kupu Kupu. So it is through all of these trainings and my trainings in that particular part of my life that I'll be pulling from as far as what my worldview is and as far as what the world means or what my surroundings mean around me for today's presentation. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. On our agenda today, I'm only going to go over 3 topics. I'm going to try and keep us within our 45-minute mark because I do want to give time for Q&A for questions and answers at the end of today's presentation. We're going to look at Ho'oia Aina, which is land acknowledgement. We're going to look at Heahaia Mea Oka protocol. What is this thing called protocol? So in trying to define a word for protocol, there's many different specific words that are used based on the practice that protocol is being applied to. For today, because we're generally looking at protocol and we're not looking at a specific type of protocol, we'll just use the general word Heahaia Mea Oka protocol. And then we'll take a look at Pilina'au Kulohelohe, environmental kinship. So as we begin to ease our way into our first segment, by the way, I was asking Lisa guys this earlier. I have this problem with my Zoom account where my toolbars will look like gray boxes in the audience window. Are you guys okay? Can you guys see the screen okay? Waikai, mahalo. So as we begin to ease our way into the first segment of today's presentation, I'll be highlighting some statements found within other universities. Just to kind of give us a general idea, if we're looking at it as a systematic or academic, within an academic or systematic setting, these are what we're going to see as land acknowledgements. Okay. So the first statement or land acknowledgement comes from California State University, San Marcos, and they state, a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects the indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land. Okay. Here we see in this form of land acknowledgement within the systematic and academic setting, it tells us, or if I were to hear a land acknowledgement based on this format, it would tell me that within that statement of acknowledging the land, I'm also recognizing my respect towards that indigenous peoples of that aina or of that land as the traditional stewards. What that means is, or to me, what that means is I'm recognizing or honoring that these indigenous peoples still exist within these traditional spaces as the traditional stewards. Yeah, there has been no set system to change their perspective of what they see their aina or see their land as, and therefore they'll act as the stewards of that land according to that perspective. Okay, so that gives us some insight to the importance of why we do land acknowledgements. Now let's kind of take a closer look at home to a university a couple islands away from us at UH Manoa and hear what they have to say about a land acknowledgement. According to UH Manoa, a land acknowledgement is a step towards conscious recognitions of the place we are in and its indigenous roots. Now, looking at it from this point of view, it if I'm to include my current knowledge of what I just seen California State University address as a land acknowledgement and build my understanding now upon what UH Manoa is stating, from this point of view, it tells me within my statement of acknowledging Aina, I am also consciously applying these intentions to my actions carried out in a particular space during a particular time. Through those statements, or through my statement of acknowledging the land, I'm saying, or I'm addressing, I'm aware of the history of my surroundings and its indigenous peoples, and will therefore conduct myself accordingly in that space. Although UH Manoa might be a little bit different than what California State University's definition of land acknowledgement is, they're still along the same guidelines as far as recognition, showing respect, and honoring the indigenous peoples as the stewards of that Aina. What I appreciate here about UH Manoa, and this is where some of your questions were coming into play, and I'm kind of stoked I found this example, where if I don't originate from that Aina or that environment, is it disrespectful for me to conduct a land acknowledgement or protocols? Yeah. Well, here in Hawaii, when we acknowledge our Aina, you don't have to originate from that space. In Hawaii, the important thing is we offer our acknowledgement to the environment that we're in, whether we originate from that space or not. Yeah. What I appreciate in this example of UH Manoa and their definition of land acknowledgement is for how to conduct a land acknowledgement to provide templates for people who might identify as non-Hawaiian or not originating from Hawaii, as to follow and what to say in a land acknowledgement. And then they have a template or an example for Native Hawaiians, who this might be a first time they're acknowledging their own Aina, or Native Hawaiians who maybe might not feel like they're Hawaiian enough to do a land acknowledgement or protocol. There's a template for them to follow by. Okay. So what I want us to do now, if my slide will change. Okay, I got it. What I want us to do now is take a look at our land acknowledgement for UH Hilo. Okay, take a few seconds, read it through, skim through it. Okay, this is what we have published on our chancellor's site as the land acknowledgement statement for our university campus. Through our campus's statement, we acknowledge the following. 1, Hawaii is an indigenous space. Okay. 2, the original people of Hawaii identify as Native Hawaiian. 3, our university location is in Waiakea Ahupua'a, or land division, in the Moku or district of Hilo. 4, it'll address UH Hilo and its commitment to foster the well-being of indigenous communities through Hawaii Papokeau's academic processes. Okay, so what we see here is the acknowledging of indigenous peoples and the use of traditional place names, which is Maikai. However, we can kind of tell based on California State and UH Manoa and what they seem or define land acknowledgement to be, we can kind of tell our land acknowledgement here, at the time this was created or composed, our university were still kind of in the baby stages of understanding what a land acknowledgement is. So if that's the case, if we're in a baby stage of understanding that, or really getting to acknowledging Aina and land, how do we strengthen our understanding of this term? How do we strengthen our understanding of what a land acknowledgement is? Well, in order for us to strengthen our understanding of land acknowledgement, or to even know what how to do a land acknowledgement or to address a land acknowledgement, is to utilize or use indigenous place names and their nomenclatures. Nomenclatures are names given to natural phenomena and cyclical events. Okay. It's to identify historical injustices of that landscape and its people. It's to acknowledge the indigenous peoples originating from that space. This is my favorite one. It's to state your intent and responsibility within a particular environment, as well as to state your intent to give back to that environment. Okay, sometimes, or a lot of times, even looking at as a cultural practitioner, sometimes we kind of leave that second half of the statement on the back burner. we kind of leave the intent to give back to our environment as an afterthought, because our main focus is gathering what we're intended to gather within that space at that given time. But when do we give back? Yeah, when is anyone setting aside a time to give back? And so with that, to acknowledge your land is not just to take or state your intent and responsibility, but it's also to state your intent to give back to that aina, or to that environment. To acknowledge land is to reawaken the innate relationships we share with our natural environment and the world around us. Okay? So let me say that again. Reawake the innate relationships we share with our natural world. Okay? To have an innate relationship is to have a kinship to a place or to a thing. Sometimes as we grow up and we leave home to continue on our education, to get a better job, to find a better life for us, we kind of lose that connection to home. We kind of lose that connection to that home environment. By reinserting ourselves into that space, yeah, sometimes what will happen is that reawakening, that re-spark of the fire, and understanding the relationship you share with those people or within that space and environment. Yeah. When we reinsert ourselves into the natural world and we disconnect ourselves from technology, we disconnect ourselves from all the materialistic things this modern world has us utilizing now, we reawaken English, Malu, reawaken some form of us, some potential within ourselves that shares that relationship, the same relationship the natural world shares. Okay. But how do I know that? How do I do that? Okay, so I'm hearing, okay, Malu, we gotta say the indigenous place names. We have to mention the nomenclatures. Okay, we have to do research on the historical injustices and make sure we're stating that within our land acknowledgements. Okay, now what? Now let's take a look at protocols, and hopefully we'll begin to find the answers to these questions. Really quickly, before we dive deeply into this segment, I want everyone to kind of take a few seconds to read through some of these general definitions. I just pulled these out of the dictionary and off of the internet. Okay, so it's nothing like super special. But what I want you to do is maybe choose one or two. If you're a quick reader, you can read through all four. In the chat box, I want you to tell me what comes to mind when you hear or read through these definitions for the word protocol. And let's see what some of you guys come up with. Leilani, Lavena, Maikai. Procedures, okay. What else? What do you guys think of if someone were to tell you to do a protocol and you didn't know how to define protocol? These were the definitions handed to you. Yeah. What comes to mind? Oh, hi, Auntie Gail. Oh, my boss stayed in this presentation. I just got more nervous now. Maikai, steps, ways of being, standards, ways to conduct yourself within that space, rituals, rules, procedures, Maikai. Okay? That is all Maikai. What I think of when I hear the term protocol based on these definitions is procedures of steps taken. Okay? It's the order in which tasks are taken care of. It is the rules or regulations in which to follow. COVID protocols, hello, like what's going on with the world around us, right? Guidelines set in place or manners and behaviors in certain situations. Okay, so based on these general definitions, these are what comes to mind when I hear the word protocol. The procedure, it focuses on the procedure. It'll focus on the order of things, the rules and regulations, the guidelines, the manner or behavior of how something is supposed to take place. However, here for us in Hawaii, yeah, and not saying that as a native Hawaiian, I'm saying that as a person in Hawaii. So you don't have to be native, you don't have to originate from this environment, you don't have to be or identify as a local a Hawaiian, okay? You can be anyone who's living in Hawaii. And this goes for everyone that's living here. In Hawaii, protocol is much more than any of these things that we see, okay? Protocol deals with our na'au, deals with that inside potential feeling that tells you when to do something, how to do something, if something is done appropriately, or if that action was inappropriate. Okay. Protocol is a space in which the whole group will unify as one. And it is a time in which Kanaka, or us humans being human, and our Aina, the natural world around us, including fauna and flora, yeah, to vibrate on the same frequency. Okay. So through the perspective of Hawaii, or living in Hawaii and conducting my work here in Hawaii, or my studies and research here in Hawaii, this is what protocol means, and how we should conduct protocol. Yeah. So in which case we will need to kind of boundary ourselves from the definitions that we see listed as a definition for protocol, or the Western perspective of protocol and how to conduct a protocol. Okay. Now with that, to support more my views or my understandings of how protocols are conducted here through a Hawaiian lens, we'll begin looking at different cultural practitioners and what protocols means to them. Okay. The first practitioner we look at is from Keli'i Reichel, who is a well-known cultural practitioner and the kumuhula of Halau Ke Ala o Ka Maile. I decided to pull from Anakala Keli'i because I've grown up around him almost my whole life, being around halau, being around their ceremony performances. And he's instilled a lot of my cultural knowledge into me from that time through my uniki in 2019, through my adulthood. And respectfully, after becoming a kumuhula, I was able to participate in a conference conducted and hosted by kumuhula for kumuhula, called Hua Makahikina, which is a declaration of the integrity, stewardship, and protection of hula. There, I learned more, or began to build more my foundations of protocol and lavena, lavena aha, I guess, how to say it, how to conduct oneself within a protocol kind of space. Here, Anakala Keli'i Reichel says, protocol focuses the attention of everyone to the task at hand. It links everyone to each other and their surroundings, strengthening human and environmental kinship. It transforms the mundane, which is ordinary kind stuffs, quote unquote, what he says in his presentation, into something much deeper. And protocol almost always involves the leo, or the voice, in some form. Okay. So in Hawaii, addressing these places, addressing what happens within these spaces, addressing the history verbally and orally, yeah, that is a protocol. That is one way we can conduct protocol. If protocol involves almost always the leo, or the voice, in some form. Okay. Another cultural practitioner I looked at was Anakala Kala Masmin, who is also a Kia'i and the chief operating officer at Edith Kanako Ole Foundation. I'm sure some of you may have met him if you're in the TCBES program. But I decided to cite and utilize his mana'o because, one, I live with him in his ohana, and I get to see physically and right off the bat how they implement our cultural values into the work they do within our community. Okay. Uncle Kala has also been trained under Antipuolani Kanahele. If you've done a little bit research on the Kanako Ole family, you'll know Antipuolani. She's a very renowned Hawaiian practitioner, one who has really brought back into activation this perspective of looking at our aina and our environment. So a lot of what I learned or was trained as in my hula years comes from Antipuolani, actually. So here, Anakala Kala, Uncle Kala Masmin states, protocol establishes and re-establishes an awareness of relationship between people, place, and things. It is a unifying mechanism giving strength to purpose. It is a safety device which reaches into the realm of the unseen. It communicates a code of behavior and respect to places, peoples, and things. and it provides a pervading attitude toward ecological sensitivity, tantamount to Malama and Aloha Aina. Okay. That one really, really hits. Providing that attitude toward ecological sensitivity, almost the same to or as equivalent to the practice of Malama and Aloha Aina. Okay. So if we're to look at protocols now based on these cultural perspectives, these cultural practitioner perspectives, or based on the perspectives of the indigenous peoples of this place, the native peoples of this place. In our case here in Hawaii, to me, what seems to be protocol is something as ceremonial and ritualistic. Protocol is a form of acknowledging Aina, or a form of land acknowledgement. Okay. Protocol informs one how to behave in a particular place or environment. Again, reawaken one's kinship to Aina. And protocol will connect and unify all participants to the same outcome, goal, or task at hand. Okay. Keep in mind that for today, what or how I'm looking at things, are very foundational and kind of like, I'm trying to keep it very beginner's level. Yeah. So if you don't understand a lot of what is being presented today, that's fine. Because this might be the first time you're learning about this topic through a different perspective, and that's fine. We can always build your understanding more and more and more on top of what you gain from today. As you continue to learn more about it and continue to utilize more protocols and land acknowledgements, your understandings of how all of that is conducted within certain practices will also grow. Okay, so today just grasp the main juice or the main meat of what we're presenting about today, and then we can continue our conversations after today if you want to get deeper into protocol and land acknowledgement. Okay. So then how does protocol land acknowledgements tie back to or relate back to environmental kinship? Well, in order for one to conduct a land acknowledgement or to conduct a protocol, one should identify in some way, shape, or form their kin to that environment. Otherwise, they kind of don't know what they're talking about, right? So to me, environmental kinship is to recognize our natural environment as kin. Is to see oneself inclusive in and not separate from the natural environment, ecosystems, cycles, and phenomena, etc. Environmental kinship is to identify ourselves as familial descendants of the natural world. Now, when we recognize our natural or our natural environment as kin, we're breaking those barriers of Western perspectives, allowing the indigenous perspective to influence our way or the way we see and perceive the world around us, the natural world around us at least. When we see ourselves inclusive in and not separate from the natural environment. Now, I'm not talking about like starting a forest fairy movement and dancing around the elder tree and like singing songs and stuff like that. No. What I'm really talking about here is to see ourselves as equal contributors to the health and life cycles of our natural environment. So for example, when our bodies sweat, we're perspiring, we're releasing water from our body through the process of transpiration. Then the process of evaporation begins, where it begins to draw out that water and evaporate it back into our cloud banks. Once the cloud banks is full of this water, it begins to move towards bodies of Aina or a forest that will collect this water and release that water. All of the excess water is released down waterways, rivers, waterfalls, water systems that we tap into and we intake as the kanaka. Therefore, we see that cycle come into full circle and continues from us to the Aina and coming back to us. So we are not separate of the cycle. We're actually contributors to this cycle, to this life cycle, as one piece, instead of as someone separate or someone who has to conduct some kind of, man-made thing to collect the water he needs, right? So that's what I mean as seeing ourselves inclusive in and not separate from. Okay. When we identify ourselves as familial descendants, we break the mental barriers that society tells me, oh, I am my own species as a human, and you're your own species as a plant. Here, through environmental kinship, although we are Kanaka, although we are human flesh and blood, we innately understand I am birthed from these ainas. I am birthed from these landscapes, from these mountains, from these oceans, these forests, these winds, these rains, these lifestyles, and these practices. Therefore, it is because of this environment I am who I am today. Almost like a family raising a child. Each family member has something different to contribute to the growth of that child, and that child is who they are because of this family. Same thing for our natural environment. Yeah, we are the child. Our natural environment are the different parents, uncles, aunties, grandparents of the family that raises us. And we are who we are as Kanaka, as human, based on the environment that surrounds us. Okay, so that is to identify ourselves as familial descendants of the world. So how can I begin to practice environmental kinship if this is my first time learning about it, or if this is my first time hearing about it? Well, being that we've just previously talked about the cyclical action of environmental kinship and seeing ourselves inclusive in and not part of, we'll follow that same cyclical action and return to the start of our presentation. You begin by utilizing land acknowledgements and protocols. Okay. To utilize land acknowledgement, or to practice land acknowledgements and protocols, as we have learned, they're one and the same. Yeah, land acknowledgement is a protocol. Protocols are land acknowledgements. And through this act, you're already developing that kin relationship to Aina. Through the act of doing that protocol, doing the acknowledging of the Aina, through this mele, through this chant, through this dance, through this ceremony, through this way I behave and conduct myself in the research, you're already developing that kin, or that sense of relationship to place. Okay. The opening protocol I did today, Noho Ana I Hilo, was written by Tutu Edith Kanaka Ole. And I chose that to open our presentation today, as it acknowledges the Hilo we're currently in now, Hilo Hanakahi. And it speaks through the indigenous people's lens as far as what the world looked like around them at that time. Okay. Another form to practice environmental kinship is to practice aloha aina, or some people might identify it as malama aina. Just as I explained in the previous slide, kinship is to see ourselves as familial descendants of our land. Okay? In this way, that is aloha aina. Okay? At its most basic form, aloha aina is to see ourselves one, or as part of, or kin to the land that we come from. This form of environmental kinship also informs us the responsibility of aloha. So a lot of times we think we look up aloha means hello, goodbye, I love you. But we don't really define the practice of aloha, or the cultural action of aloha when two come together and breathe and share the same breath. Yeah. What aloha really is here is that reciprocation, is what I was mentioning before as the give, or the take away, but also the give back, right? If you're sharing breath with someone, you're equally giving your breath to this person as they're giving theirs to you. And that is what is equally being exchanged amongst both parties. Same thing with our aina. Okay? We cannot always just expect our aina to keep producing for us. In some way, shape, or form, we always have to show aloha in giving back to aina. And that is environmental kinship. Now, if we're looking at aloha aina, or environmental kinship as aloha aina or malama aina, it is then a lifelong practice. Okay, environmental kinship will then become a lifelong practice. It will literally take every breath of your being in order to tend to take care of, to apply environmental kinship practices into your lives. Yeah, although we won't see any physical changes or progress within the fields of area that we're working in, we gotta understand that the small parts that we do get to contribute to are the long-lasting effects of what creates that positive change and progress within our aina. Okay, it's a lifelong practice. We may not see the end result, we may not see the outcome, but we can always contribute in small ways that we can. Ano Leila, as I come to the ending of my presentation, I hope some of these basic, maybe not so basic ideologies of land acknowledgement, protocols, and environmental kinship kind of has shifted the way you view yourself in this field, the way you view your connection to our place, Hawaii, whether you originate from this place or not. I hope that you're able to utilize at least one thing from today's presentation to help you develop a deeper connection to Hawaii and our natural environment. So before I close and I get to our Q&A section at 3:45, I wanted to kind of leave us off with this protocol. I wrote this Ole Aloha, or this welcoming chant, a couple weeks ago, specifically for today's presentation, in hopes that you'll be able to utilize it to strengthen your connection to protocols and land acknowledgement. You can use this as a welcoming chant. You can use this when you're going out into the community and visiting different networks to kind of enter into their space as a noi komo. You can use it as a mele kahea when people visit your front door and you need them to enter into your house or your program, whatever conference it is. You can use this as a mele kahea with a simple change in the words of the last line, but we won't go into that today. What we'll go into is the simple learning of this chant. Okay, so I'll go ahead and perform this chant for you if you want to take out a recording device. So you have a voice recording of it. If not, I believe Lisa is recording today's session, so you can refer to afterwards this segment of the chant. After I go through the chant, I'll teach you guys line by line the words of the chant and then how to do the chant. And then we all can do it together to close off our presentation. Okay. So if you have a voice recording device, give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go. Okay. This chant, I didn't give it a name, but we'll call it Hilo Aina Noho Ika Malu Kuahiwi. O hilo aina noho ika malu kuahiwi o waia kea iuka o kai palawa ikai o pana ewa kahia a ala o ka maile me ka lehua ia e hapai nei i ka hale o a he leo vale no Really simple, simple 5-line chant that you can utilize as your protocol for your program. The chant goes, O hilo aina noho ika malu kuahiwi. Hilo, land sheltered by the mountain. Which mountains am I referring to? Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. O waia kea iuka, o kai palawa i kai. Waia kea is the uplands and kai palawa in the ocean. O pana ewa kahia a ala o ka maile me ka lehua e. From pana ewa comes my yearning desire for the scent of maile and lehua. E ia e hapai nei i ka leo, a he leo vale no e. My voice is given to these spaces. It is just the voice. Okay. Again, with protocols, sometimes you don't, or all the time, people think in order to do a protocol, we got to go to a whole ceremony kind of thing. Yeah. For protocols, sometimes the most simplest protocol is the most effective. And what is the most simplest protocol, as we've learned from Anakala Kelly, is the use of our voice. Okay. So through this chant, we're acknowledging Hilo. We're acknowledging Hilo situated between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, and not acknowledging that Hilo Hanakahi Waia Kea is the upper region boundary, and Kaipalawa is the ocean boundary line, and Pana Ewa is the forest boundary line. Okay. Here I give my voice. I offer my voice to you. It is just my voice. Okay. So what I want you to do is repeat after me. O hilo aina noho ika malu kuahiwi. Kai. O waia kea iuka.
O waia kea iuka.
O kai palawa i kai.
Kai plawa i kai.
O pana ewa kahia a ala.
O pana ewa kahia a ala.
O ka maile me kale huae.
O ka maile me kalihua e.
E iaʻe e hāpai nei i ka leo.
Ea e hāpai nei i ka leo.
A he leo wale no e.
Ahe leo wale no e.
Mai ka iloa. Okay. Now we're gonna add the voice to it, okay? So I'll do the first repeat and then you repeat after me. No worry, I understand we're not a Hawaiian studies class, so this might be your first time chanting or this might be your first time utilizing your voice in a different language. Just the main thing is today you try, okay? So first line. O hilo aina noho I ka malu kuahi. And you go. O hilo aina noho I ka malu
kuahi.
Mai kai. Next line. O waia kea I uka o kai palawa I kai. O waia kea I uka o kai palawa I kai. Ai kai. Next line. O pana ewa kahia a ala o ka maile me kale huae. Okay, next line. E ia e hapai nei I ka leo. A he leo wale no e. Okay, so we're gonna try throw these lines together. We'll take the first two lines and then we'll piece them together. Then we'll take the last two lines, piece them together, and then we'll put both halves together so that we can end our presentation today. Okay, so repeat after me. O hilo aina noho I ka malu kuahi o waia kea I uka o kai palawa I kai. Next two lines. O pana ewa kahia a ala o ka maile me kale huae. E ia e hapai nei I ka leo. A he leo wale no e. Mai ka ino. Okay. Let us all jam all four lines together one time. We go chant them together to close off our presentation for today. And now you would have learned a new protocol to utilize within your program. Okay, mai kai. So I'll go ahead and start it. Once you hear me say noho I ka malu kuahiwi, then you guys can jump right in. A oya. O hilo aina noho I ka malu kuahiwi o waia kea I uka o kai palawa I kai. O pana ewa kahia a ala o ka maile me kale huae. E ia e hapai nei I ka leo. A he leo wale no e. A oia, ano leila me ia mamanao I hapai ia I mua o kou. Ke hapai nei au I ko'u leo aloha me ka mahalo ia o kou pakahi a pau. Iola oi, Ola Kākou. No leila. Therefore, that concludes my presentation for today. I want to extend my aloha and my mahalo to each and every one of you for participating and joining me today in my presentation. Iola oi, Ola Kākou. Let you live so we all may thrive. Mahalo nui.